After finding a piece of jungle in Ecuador perfect for year-round farming, Gary Young noticed a crumbling cinder block schoolhouse nearby. The 42 students in attendance didn't have access to running water, electricity, or many of the materials necessary for a good education.
I thought it was an abandoned building, and then I started seeing children here.
Gary knew he could give them better. A year later, he did just that by opening the Young Living Academy. This started a new chapter of philanthropy, and soon, the D. Gary Young Living Foundation took shape, with the mission of helping to relieve human suffering and empowering individuals all over the world.
It's exciting for the children to see where their new home is going to be in a few months.
Whoops. User error. Oh my god. Hello, it's DC and Kat, and we're here talking about the MLM, all the MLM stuff with Young Living and doTERRA, and their legal case that they this has already ended, but the reason that I like doing it in this long format is because I was in so much information control before when I was in Young Living and in Mary Kay, that I like knowing every single piece of information. I don't like cutting. I don't like a certain angle, and I'm trying to pair this up with like these promotional / propaganda videos at the beginning so that you can get an idea of like what we're up against in terms of overcoming this view of, in my opinion, they kind of view him as a deity almost, of how shiny and sparkly D. Gary Young is.
An idol, for sure.
An idol. And so that's why I'm like, I know it's long. I have a blast with Kat. I'm so glad she's here, like, doing this with me. And I don't have any certifications. Kat is the brains behind this operation, and I'm so glad.
You don't need certifications to put this together really well.
But,
we are like a quarter through this by the end of today.
Holy crap. That's amazing. That's such a good goal. I was like, that's amazing. It's 4,000 pages. We only have 2 shortcuts, not shortcuts, but kind of like wrap-ups from the maybe 2 for the first and the second transcript, and it didn't even cover all the second transcripts. So we're working on making the like, hey, this is what happened when we were reading through hundreds of pages of transcript, but it's just it takes a little bit. So thanks for joining us in the live chat. I'm going to hand the introduction mic over to Kat and let her introduce her incredible self to you all.
You're so sweet. My name is Kat. I'm a licensed registered dietitian, nutritionist, and online nutrition coach person, nutrition educator. My main goal is to just kind of I'm going to use the word empower because a lot of MLMs like using that word, but I just want people to know where to get evidence-based information from, not be duped by scammy products, programs, things that just promote more nutrition fear and place physical health over their mental, social, emotional well-being, because those are just as important as physical. So don't do Beachbody, don't do any nutrition related MLM. And I like to make videos discussing nutrition related MLM scams, diets, and a non-diet approach instead.
And you're currently taking clients on your website, is that correct?
Yes, I am.
So Kat works in lots of different like she works on a one-on-one basis, on a group basis. She's incredible. So if you've been looking for that type of actual licensed help with your wellness journey in a non-culty way, check out Kat's website. I'm gonna link it in my description, and you can also go to Kat's YouTube page and find that out there. So just want to continue promoting incredible people who are not going to do all of the mind games with you and actually like know what they're talking about. So
my goal is to build skills and let people fly away like little birdies. I don't want to keep long-term people like Weight Watchers or Beachbody or anything.
Yeah, so it's a little echoey. Let me see. Let me hop out and hop back in. I'm running it through my soundboard, but let me.
Do we have new soundboard? New sound?
I don't have a new soundboard, but
No
let me.
voices.
Is that better? Live chat. Hey.
Hey, Shannon. Beth says it's on mine, I think.
Okay.
Oops.
It sounds good in the
studio.
I
know, because I'm on. I have my microphone plugged in, but the speaker says my Mac. Hold on.
Okay.
Let me leave studio. Hold on.
Okay. So we are going to be I'm digital. We're going to be looking at the transcript, and I'm going to pull that up while I'm here. She just needs to change her output on her. Oh no, my iPad's dead. Crap. Oh my God. How's everybody doing? Beth, Jessica. Hey, just join. Everything sounds good. Okay. Kat should be back in a second. Willow, hi. Sky. Sky's artwork is...
There we go.
Okay, sweet. It sounds good to me, so I had no idea anything was up. This is Sky's artwork. She's awesome. She did a few different pieces for us, so we always love a good Young Living lawyer and doTERRA lawyer duking it out in court. I'm just turning on my iPad, which just turned on. Great.
You're ready to go.
We're ready to go. I'm plugged in. Great. Love to see it. Document pad. We should be on the same page we left it on, I think.
Beth votes demon lawyer for everything.
Okay. Uh-oh, I don't know what page we were on. Let me see.
I have it open. 964 or 91.
964?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
91 of this document, though.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm there. I'm going to share my screen. Aircast. I don't want to rate your app right now. Okay. Start broadcast. Control.
This will be the redirect examination by Mr. Toth to we're still on Justin Harrison.
Oh my gosh, Justin. Will it ever end? We don't know. He is.
It does end in this PDF.
Does. Great. So Justin Harrison is the master distributor over at doTERRA. And it's interesting. So master meaning he is the very tippity top of the pyramid. Everyone stems from Justin. And it's pretty wild to think about. I don't know if he gets additional compensation for agreeing to be the top or if he had to sign something extra to do that. I have no idea, honestly. Open as pop-up. Okay.
And Mr. Toth is with Young Living. So that's who's going to be.
Yep. And just because one MLM company won over another MLM company, it doesn't mean that we feel better about doTERRA compared to Young Living. It just I'm not a fan of any MLM, so everyone has a different opinion. I don't think Kat's a fan of MLMs either, but we're just trying to reveal some of the tea that's been revealed in these transcripts.
doTERRA is still doTerrable.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I need to use that in a title for a
Did
video.
not create that.
Oh my gosh. Add to stream. And here we are. Okay. And
All
so
right.
are we doing polite demon lawyer? Oops. Oh
I
God.
sent you an email with the new updates yesterday.
Whoops.
You're still
I'll
being
just grab it
shown
real
the screen, by the
Okay,
way.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Just in
Cat's
case
on top of it. Okay, Gmail. Sorry about that. Cat.
Hello, everyone.
October 18th. Yep. Thank you very much.
Oh, it wasn't yesterday.
Save.
Yeah, the day before.
Save to files in my transcript folder. 10, 18. Save.
It's going to be a double.
It's a double whammy. Okay. Young Living. Let me import this into my import document. Young Living transcripts. 10, 18. There it is. Okay. Skip numbering. Skip numbering. There we go. Yeah, 91. Live chat. Thank you for your patience. User error on my part. Okay, let's go. Okay.
All right. Perfect.
Let me okay, I think live chat, what are we doing? Are we doing polite demon lawyer?
That was a first.
That was the first recommendation.
Yes. And
is that what we're doing?
Yes.
Okay, great. Great.
Okay. Are you Mr. Toth or Justin?
Let's let live chat decide.
Live chat, should polite demon or did the polite demon voice be Justin Harrison, who's with doTERRA the Terrible, or should it be for Mr. Toth, who's with Young Living? We love polite demon lawyer. Okay. Oops.
Is your iPad plugged in? Yeah, it's plugged in.
Yes, it is plugged in. It's not going to turn off. It's just I'm going to stop it from rotating if I can find that option.
It's at the very top left.
Yep. Thank you. I get nervous like on live streaming and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my God, how do I do everything? Okay, lawyer. Okay,
right,
I'll
lawyer.
be Mr. Toth. Yep. All right. Let me move my iPhone over here and we'll set this down right here.
Yeah, I don't know who came
Okay.
up with it. I know I've heard Jess and Kira say doTerrable.
That's amazing.
But
That is doTerrable from now on. Yep.
All right, let's go. Mr. Toth, good morning, Mr. Harrison.
Good morning.
You recall that Mr. Smith asked you about, it was Exhibit 27. It was your non-solicitation agreement with Young Living. Do you recall his questions about that?
Yes.
And do you recall he asked you about whether you would have signed that agreement if it meant that you couldn't talk to your friends and family for oh wait, did I skip? No. I'm just kidding. And do you recall he asked you about whether you would have signed that agreement if it meant that you couldn't talk to your friends and family for a year? And you said, quote, I never would have signed if I had known that, end quote. Do you remember that?
I do.
And it's not what the agreement says, is it?
Explain.
All the agreement says is that you can't solicit your friends and family to join another company for a year, right?
Mr. Smith says objection, calls for legal conclusion, and the court says overruled. Back to Justin. He says correct.
And Mr. Toss said, it doesn't say you can't talk to your friends and family, right?
No.
Okay, and so is your testimony still that you wouldn't have signed the agreement if you knew you couldn't solicit your friends and family to doTERRA?
Yes.
Okay, you talked a little bit about Gina Truman and your contact with Gina Truman prior, while you were working at Young Living. Do you recall that?
I do.
If Gina Truman testifies that you asked her to teach a class for Young Living, would you disagree with her?
Her and her husband were asked to be trainers for Young Living. Yes.
Right, and that's something you asked them to do, isn't it?
But I don't recall if it was me or someone else.
But you wouldn't disagree with her if that's her testimony, that you asked her to do it.
I don't recall doing it.
Okay, is that something we just defer to her testimony on?
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit. You talked a little bit about your job duties, and it was in the context of, if you remember, acquaintance, called upon, service. Do you recall that discussion with Mr. Smith?
I do.
Let's talk a little bit about your job duties at Young Living. You participated in doing trainings for distributors, did you not?
I did.
And you provided support to the diamond level distributors with their downlines, did you not?
It was support with the diamond level leaders. Yes.
And you would occasionally participate in phone calls with them with their downlines, would you not?
Generally, no. Generally, it was just with their leaders.
Okay, I'm not asking generally. My question is, you would occasionally participate in phone calls with your diamonds with their downlines, correct?
On occasion, yes.
All right, and Mr. Smith used our exhibit here and said, asked you, were any of these people diamond level distributors? Do you remember that?
I do.
And you answered that they weren't, correct?
Correct.
Are you saying that you didn't know any platinum, gold, silver, or star level distributors at Young Living?
I'm saying that I was asked to work with the diamond level leaders.
I understand what you said you were asked to do. I have a different question for you. Listen to my question. My question is just, are you saying that you didn't know any platinum, gold, or silver, or star level distributors at Young Living while you worked there?
I was aware of some.
You were aware of some. You would agree, how many, by the way, how many diamond level distributors were there at Young Living while you worked there?
I don't know a number. Maybe I could guess, but I don't know.
Give me your best estimate, please.
Mr. Gaylord says, objection, Your Honor. The court says overruled. Back to Justin. He said, maybe 100.
100?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just don't recall. Sorry.
It's alright, but you got to know platinum, gold, silver, and star level distributors while you were working at Young Living, did you not?
Be aware of, but not work with.
You were certainly acquainted with hundreds of distributors at Young Living, were you not?
Yes. Name and face.
You were acquainted with hundreds of distributors at Young Living.
Yes.
And many of those distributors were platinum, gold, silver, or stars, because by your best estimate, there were only 100 diamond levels, correct?
Correct.
Do you recall Mr. Gaylord asked you some questions about when you actually learned that the defendants were creating a new essential oil company? Do you remember that?
I think so.
And Mr. Smith asked you about those this morning also, didn't he?
Yes.
And you told Mr. Gaylord, and then you said it again this morning to Mr. Smith, that you suspected they were creating a new oil company before you resigned. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And now we've also learned that you were on a phone call on February 7th where you learned the name of the company was doTERRA, and they were forming a new company, correct?
I learned the name of the company earlier than that.
So you knew the company existed even before February 7th, is that correct?
That was a rumor circulating in the office, yes.
So you knew that, correct?
I knew the name. Mike McLean shared the name with us.
And you knew that name was associated with the founders, Miss Wright, Mr. Sterling, Mr. Cook, Mr. Hill, correct?
No, I did not know for sure who was associated with it.
So you had no idea. You heard this name doTERRA, but you didn't know it was associated with Mr. Sterling and Miss Wright? You had no idea?
I did not know.
Did you suspect?
Yes, I suspected.
Okay. But in truth, Mr. Harrison, you didn't know about the new oil company until you went to doTERRA's offices on February 12th, the morning of February 12th. Isn't that true? Isn't that the truth?
No, it was confirmed to me the existence of the new oil company after the phone call with Rob and Gina.
Let me ask you to look at your deposition testimony. May I approach, Your Honor?
The court says yes, of course.
Mr. Harrison, let me ask you to look at your deposition testimony from 2013, okay? And in 2013, we were 3.5 years closer to the events that we're talking about here today, aren't we?
Right.
And this was sworn testimony you gave in September of 2013, correct?
Correct.
You raised your hand just like you did in this courtroom today, didn't you?
Yes.
And after you gave that deposition testimony, you had the opportunity for 30 days to read this deposition and correct any mistakes you made in it, didn't you?
Yes.
Let me ask you to turn to page 55. Let me know when you have that in front of you, sir.
55?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And let me ask you to turn to line 20. Look at line 20. I'm going to read that question and I would like you to read the answer, all right?
Okay.
Question. Tell me as much as you can about the details of this conversation you had in February, the morning of February 12th with the founders of doTERRA, end quote. Answer?
It was, quote, "That's going to be hard. It's 6 years ago. We talked about their goals," end quote.
Let me ask you to turn the page. Question. What did they tell you the goals were, end quote. Answer?
Quote, "I don't recall to be certain," end quote.
Question. Was this the first time you had heard about these individuals you were meeting with were in the process of creating an essential oils company? Answer.
Quote, "Yes," end quote.
Question. Were you surprised that they were creating an essential oils company? End quote. Answer.
Quote, "A little bit, because the rumors that they were starting a juice company."
Sorry. Question. When you say the rumors, what rumors? End quote.
Quote, "I remember being in a meeting at Young Living. I don't remember what we were talking about. But at one point, Doug Corrigan, who I believe is the marketing director, I'm not certain on that, burst into our meeting and announced to us they're starting a company. They're starting a juice company. And then we just began to hear people talking about it," end quote.
Question. But prior to this time, you had no idea that they were forming an essential oils company. End quote. Answer.
Quote, "I didn't," end quote.
Is it fair to say, Mr. Harrison, your memory has gotten a lot better in the last 4 days?
It is, because I spent the weekend studying.
But you had 30 days to correct this after you gave this testimony in September of 2013. Did you not?
And Mr. Gaylord says, objection, Your Honor. May I have a sidebar? And the court says, yes, a sidebar discussion was had. Back to Mr. Toth.
Let's look at
town.
Let's look at what's been marked at Exhibit 51.
Okay.
All right. And do you remember that Mr. Gaylord asked you whether the statements you made in this document were true? Do you recall him saying that?
I do.
Hey, Clowntown, sorry, I forgot to say hi. And you said, in fact, you testified that you signed this document at the beginning of this meeting on February 12th in doTERRA's offices. Do you remember that?
I do.
So, because of that, your statement that you had initiated this contract and that you hadn't had any discussion or description of the company, its business, products, or opportunities with any of the principals was true. Do you recall that?
Yes.
We'll come back to this document, Mr. Harrison. Let's turn our attention to phone calls that took place on February 7th. And this is exhibit...
Sorry.
No, you're fine. This is exhibit 21.
Too many books.
And we're back to exhibit 21. And if you recall, sir, Mr. Gaylord asked you about a conversation you had on the telephone with Gina Truman and Rob James on February 7th. Do you recall that?
I do.
And do you remember initially you told Mr. Gaylord you could not remember the details of the call? Do you remember that?
Yes.
Had no independent recollection of it?
Yes.
Remember that?
I do.
And then, so Mr. Gaylord had you look at an email between Rob James and Mr. Sterling from February 7th. Do you recall that?
I do.
And you read that email, correct?
Yes.
And you said that then refreshed your recollection, correct?
Correct.
Not looking at the phone records refreshed your recollection, correct?
Correct.
Looking at the email refreshed your recollection, correct?
I would say it was a combination of both.
So he didn't show you the phone records to refresh your recollection, did he? He just showed you the email and you read from the email and you said your recollection was refreshed, correct?
Correct.
Well, let me have you look at that email again. Do not publish this yet. That's Exhibit 36, sir. I think I may make sure you have it. You looked at that email and you said that refreshed your recollection. And you remembered several things based on that refreshed recollection after reading that email, correct?
Yeah, correct.
And you said that what the email made you remember was that Gina and Rob were excited about this new oils company and that they were recruiting you to join the company, correct?
That was my impression, yes.
Well, that's what the email refreshed your recollection to remember, correct?
Yes.
And I believe you also said, correct me if I'm wrong, that you recall them asking you to do a meeting in St. George later in February.
I don't think I recalled that, no.
Okay, so I want to focus on that call again. So is it you actually discussed a lot more on that call than what you remembered, didn't you?
I don't remember every detail of the call.
It was a 30-minute call, correct?
It was a long call.
And in that call, you told them about your vision for yourself and your plan at doTERRA, didn't you?
No.
You talked about with Rob James. You specifically talked about Operation Smooth Move, didn't you?
No.
Reading that email didn't refresh your recollection on any of those points?
No.
You talked about how Carol Truman was going to react when she learned that Gina Truman and Boyd Truman were thinking about or going over to or had gone over to doTERRA, didn't you?
No, I don't recall that.
You don't remember talking about how she would react to all of this?
No.
And that email from Mr. James didn't refresh your recollection on any of those points?
No, sir.
Alright, let's change subjects for a minute. Do you remember that Mr. Gaylord showed you your phone records from February 7th?
I do.
And that's exhibit, let me ask you to look at exhibit 21, page 102. And let me ask you to look at line 207 and 208.
Okay.
And you testified, if we look at lines 207 and 208, that right after the phone call right here with on 206 with Rob James and Gina Truman, that you called David Hill. Do you remember that?
I do.
And there's a couple 1-minute calls. Do you know whether you left a voicemail or not?
I typically don't leave voicemails, so no.
And Mr. Gaylord asked you why were you calling him, and you said, I wrote this down, quote, to tell him I now knew what he was doing, end quote. Do you remember saying that to the jury?
I do.
So you were going to tell him that you now knew about doTERRA, and you knew what he was up to, correct?
Correct.
But then you testified you didn't reach him that night. Do you remember that?
No.
Do you remember Mr. Gaylord asking you, did you ever make contact with Mr. Hill that evening?
I don't recall being asked that. No.
Do you remember Mr. Gaylord asking you about whether you recognized the phone number on 209?
I don't.
Do you recall telling him you didn't recognize that phone number?
I don't recall that. No.
All right. And in fact, now you've testified this morning that you did some more work over the last 3 days, correct?
Yes.
And now you know that. In fact, that was the phone call to Mr. Hill, wasn't it?
Yes, that's his home phone.
And you knew that he lived in Spanish Fork at that time, didn't you?
Correct.
And when you saw that phone number on Friday, you knew that Mr. Hill lived in Spanish Fork at that time, didn't you?
Yes.
And you knew his home phone number, didn't you?
Not by memory, no.
But your testimony is that in conversation, that 9-minute conversation, Mr. Hill absolutely would not talk to you about doTERRA.
He would not.
He would not?
No.
So you told him, quote, I know what you're doing. I know you're founding a new oil company. I've heard all about it, end quote. And what did he say?
Quote, you still work at Young Living. I can't talk to you about it, end quote.
That's actually what he said?
Something along those lines.
So your testimony is, let me back up. Do you recognize the phone number redacted as a phone number at the corporate phone number for doTERRA?
I do.
And do you know that there are extensions for other people who worked at doTERRA that come off that line? For example, there's 7201, 7202.
Excuse me? I believe that's true.
So your testimony to this jury is that you did not talk to any of the principals or founders of doTERRA about doTERRA prior to your conversation on the morning of February 12th, correct?
Yes. Hey, Jess.
Okay. Who is Rob Young?
Rob Young is one of the co-founders of doTERRA.
He's a founder of doTERRA, isn't he?
Founder of doTERRA, yes.
What's his position there?
Director of, well, he's the vice president of marketing. Yeah.
When did you first meet Rob Young?
He was actually one of my 13 bosses at Young Living.
So you knew Rob Young from Young Living?
He was there briefly, yes.
And when was he there?
Oh, goodness. I'm uncertain on the dates. Probably 2006, 2005. Possibly 2006, 2005.
Is he someone you knew well?
Not very well, no.
Someone you considered a personal friend?
No.
Let's look at your phone records from February 6th. The day before, you had this phone call with Rob and Wendy James. Let me, and that, sir, I believe that is page 101.
Okay.
And let me direct your attention to, I believe it is line 169. Do you see that?
I do.
If Mr. Young were to testify that that was his cell phone number, would you have any reason to disagree with that?
Mr. Gaylord says object to form. The court says overruled. And Harrison, back to him, says, if he were to testify to that, I suppose not.
You called Rob Young, one of the founders of doTERRA, on February 6th at 11:09 a.m. Do you recall that?
I don't.
Do you recall talking to him returning your call a little later that afternoon at 1:36?
Mr. Smith says objection. Facts assumes facts not in evidence, and the court says overruled. Back to Harrison. I don't. No.
Do you recall having a 34-minute phone call with Mr. Young on February 6th at 1:41 p.m.?
Again, Mr. Smith says objection assumes facts not in evidence. The court says overruled, and Justin Harrison says, I don't recall any calls with him.
Is it your testimony that you never spoke with Rob James prior to February 12th, 2008?
That is my testimony, yes.
Let's jump back to your records on page, I believe it's page 100, on February 4th, 2 days before February 6th.
Okay.
And let me direct your attention to line 117.
Okay.
Do you see that there is a 1-minute phone call from your phone at 10:53 a.m. to a cell phone belonging that we believe belongs to Rob Young? Do you see that?
I do.
Now, let me ask you to look at the next line, page 118, on line 118 rather, I'm sorry. Do you see there's a return phone call to you about an hour later?
Right.
Number redacted, do you see that?
I do.
That's one of the extension lines at the doTERRA offices, isn't it?
Mr. Gaylord says objection, foundation. The court says overruled, and Justin says, I believe so.
Why would someone from doTERRA's offices be calling you on February 4th if you didn't know about doTERRA as of February 7th and you weren't talking to any of the principals until February 12th?
I don't know.
Do you know whether or not that was Rob Young's extension at doTERRA?
I do not.
Now, let's go back to Exhibit 51. Before I get there, Mr. Harrison, let me ask you a different question. Before I ask you about Exhibit 51, you said you spent this weekend refreshing your recollection, correct?
Yes.
And you said you spent this weekend, in fact, you even said you looked over some of the phone records, correct?
I did.
But you didn't look over. Did you look over the phone records for the day before your phone call with Rob James and Gina Truman?
No, just the day of and a few days after.
You didn't look at the very previous day?
I did not.
But what, I want to be clear about this, is your testimony is you did not speak with Rob James prior to February 12th, 2008, correct?
I don't recall any conversation with Rob James.
None whatsoever?
No, not until much later after doTERRA started.
So, in fact, isn't it true, Mr. Harrison, that you did speak with the principals and founders at least one of them of doTERRA prior to February 12th, 2008? Thank you. It's the pleasure of working with good counsel. Mr. Smith just pointed out that I said Rob James, not Rob Young. Thank you, Mr. Smith. The correct question was, you did not talk to any principals of doTERRA, including Rob Young, prior to February 12th, 2008.
About doTERRA, that is correct.
Do you remember Mr. Gaylord's questions to you about a phone call you had with Emily Wright Do you remember that?
Remotely, yes. And Mr. Gaylord says vague.
Well, let me put a little finer point on it. Do you recall when I was asking you questions about your phone calls with Miss Wright? You said you, frankly, couldn't recall any phone calls with her. Do you remember that?
Yes.
That was your testimony when I was asking you questions.
Yes.
And then Mr. Gaylord got up on Friday and said he asked you about a call that occurred on October 11th, 2007. Do you recall that?
Okay.
And when I asked you about that question, you said you didn't remember it at all, right?
I don't recall.
You don't recall that you didn't recall. Fair enough?
Right.
Fair enough. But when Mr. Gaylord got up and asked you about it, he said, quote, would it refresh your recollection if you knew that Miss Wright had resigned on October 1st, 2007, end quote. Do you remember him asking you that question?
Yes.
And you said it did. Do you remember that?
I do.
And what you said to him was, and I wrote it down when he said, quote, does that refresh your recollection as to what the October 11th phone call was about, end quote. You said it did, right?
Yes.
And you said, quote, the October 11th call was most likely to check on her to make sure she was okay. She underwent a very intense verbal beatdown from Gary Young at the Washington, D.C. convention. So likely I would have wanted to just make sure she was all right, end quote. Do you recall saying that?
I do.
So your testimony is that this call was just you checking on her well-being?
Absolutely.
Let's put up Exhibit 21. If you can highlight that phone call.
What's the page?
I'm sorry, I'm going to come to it right now. It's at page 48 and it is line 277. So do you have that in front of you now, sir?
Yes.
Do you see that that's not an outbound phone call, is it, sir?
It says incoming.
Right. That's Emily Wright calling you on that day, isn't it?
Yes.
Does that refresh your recollection that she was calling you about becoming a founding distributor for their new oils company?
No.
But you weren't reaching out to her in this call. That was a call from her to you, wasn't it?
That's what it shows.
Let's look very quickly again at Exhibit 13. You were asked about this by Mr. Gaylord also. And I just want to point out to you again, sir, do you recall Mr. Gaylord asking you about this statement by Mr. Sterling to Rob James, where he says, quote, Justin is dying to join us as a distributor, end quote.
I do recall it, reading that, yes.
And you said that you never talked to Mr. Sterling about becoming a distributor, correct?
Correct.
Do you have any knowledge of how Mr. Sterling would know that you wanted to be a distributor?
I don't.
It wasn't because you had spoken to Miss Wright about being a distributor, was it?
No.
And it wasn't because you had talked to Mr. Hill about being a distributor?
No.
Even though you had lots of phone calls with Mr. Hill during that, prior to December 27th, 2007.
Correct.
Let's change subjects. Let me ask you to look at, sir, Exhibit 21. Those are your phone records, page 103, line 231.
Okay.
Do you have that in front of you?
231, yes.
And you recall that when I asked you about that 23-minute phone call, when I called you to the witness stand on Friday morning, you told me you had no recollection of discussing anything with David Hill. Do you recall that?
I do.
But you've now since remembered different aspects of what you talked to Mr. Hill about, correct?
Of this specific call?
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure about that specific call.
All right, well, what about have you now? Do you have any recollection of what you talked with Lillian Shepard about? Because, let me back up. When I asked you on Friday morning, did you remember what you discussed with Lillian Shepherd on the morning? On Saturday, February 9th, your testimony was, quote, I don't recall, end quote. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you've now since recalled that testimony, recalled what those discussions were. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about Gordon Herbert, okay?
Okay.
You testified that he attended your meeting on February 28th, correct?
Yes.
And you testified that you probably had a call with him to let him know that you were coming to St. George.
Yes.
And how long would it take you to let him know you were coming to St. George? About as long as it took me to ask that question?
It depends on the conversation involved.
But when you're telling someone you're coming to
Not long.
St. George, it's, hey, I'm coming to St. George, right? Don't involve any more than that, right?
It could. Not long.
Couple of minutes.
Yes.
And Mr. Smith, if you recall his examination this morning, he put up a series of your phone records showing that you actually had a number of phone calls with Mr. Herbert prior to that February 28th meeting, correct?
Yes.
Isn't it fair to say you were discussing with him how that meeting was going to be conducted?
I don't remember all the details.
Can someone remember something? Oh, that didn't say that. My question is, were you discussing with him how the meeting on February 28th was going to be conducted?
Yes.
And including who was being invited?
No.
Is it your testimony that you had no idea who was going to be at that meeting?
I knew that Gina would be there, and outside of that, I didn't know who would be there.
You had no idea?
No.
You didn't know that you knew that Gordon Herbert was going to be there, right?
He may have told me.
Well, you had several conversations with him prior.
Yeah.
And you knew that Gina Truman was going to be there. Did you know that Carol Truman was going to be there?
I did not.
You knew that Carol Truman was a young living distributor, right?
She was not there.
That's your testimony?
Carol Truman?
Yes.
Yes, she was not at the meeting.
So you would disagree with any other testimony that said that Carol Truman was there?
Mr. Gaylord says, objection, foundation, Your Honor, and the court says sustained. And back to Mr. Toth. And they're talking about Carol with the K here.
Carol with the K. Here.
Let's take a chat break so we can hang out with the chat.
Carol with the K.
Carol with a K. I know I'm lagging. Sorry, chat.
Yeah.
Missed a bunch. Sorry about that. Thanks so much for the participation and letting
You recalled not recalling. Yeah. No, that's what he had asked. Fizzlesticks.
if this case took place in the 1000th layer of hell. Yep. Hello, everybody.
Do you recall not recalling?
I'm just imagining a bunch of literal diamonds on a conference call. That would be incredible. I'm just wondering how flammable the oils are, considering they're all coated in them. Good point.
Oh, goodness.
Rob, the courtroom probably smelled really bad. Hey, I know we said that. No, we're good. That's just my phone. Okay. Oh my god. Trying to go through. Yes, I don't think anybody recalls anything. I'm just confused. I'm very, very, very confused. With all these, do you remember? I half expected you to say the 21st night of September. Yes. I don't know if Jess is still here, but hello.
Oh, I got it. Mm-hmm.
Hey.
I love all the Carol with the K love.
Yes.
Do you remember?
The transcript doesn't lie, sir. Yep. You recalled not recalling, or did I miss you?
You were
that?
not
Yep.
stupid, Avery. There's a lot.
Yes.
To remember.
Yes. Yep.
From previous transcripts.
Yep. Mr. Toth is trying to get Mr. Harrison in a gotcha moment. He's trying to establish that what he said either wasn't the truth, or he's trying to take away his credibility. Carol with a K is an icon. She is. Absolutely. Icon. We love Carol with a K. Oh my gosh. All right.
But
okay, let me take a quick drink of my milk and I'll get right back to it. All right. Demon lawyer, let's go.
Okay. Back to Mr. Toth on line 4.
Thank you. You had, and Mr. Smith, I believe, and I think you testified to this. I want to make sure I have this writing. Actually, let's look at Exhibit 21. Why don't you turn to page 118?
Okay.
Have you got that in front of you, sir?
I do.
I'd like you to look at line 87.
Okay.
Do you recognize that as the phone number belonging to Gordon Herbert?
I believe it is, yes.
And that's a phone call on the day of that meeting for 4 minutes, correct?
Right.
And if we turn to page 119 and we look at lines 101, 102, and 104, you continue to have a series of phone calls with Mr. Herbert. I think it's this one up here, Mr. Herbert, throughout that afternoon, correct?
Yes, all very short calls.
Indeed, they're not very long. I agree with you. They don't seem to be long calls. What were you discussing with him?
With certainty, I couldn't say.
Was it kind of likely that you would have been talking about the meeting you were going to do that evening, that he was going to be attending with you?
Yes.
You testified earlier that you thought Mr. Herbert actually joined doTERRA sometime in April of 2008, correct?
I don't recall exactly.
Well, Mr. Smith, Mr. Gaylord showed you his distributor application, right?
Yes.
Do you recall that was something he sent in sometime in April of 2008?
Yes, that seems right.
And you were his enrolling sponsor, correct?
I believe so.
And I think your testimony on Friday was an enrolling sponsor is someone who is the person who introduced them to doTERRA. Typically, it's a person that is paid some bonuses. Do you recall saying that?
I do.
Would it surprise you if your phone calls reflected almost 50 calls between you and the Herberts? Phone numbers between February 11th and April 14th, 2008.
It wouldn't surprise me, no.
The fact that Mr. Herbert submitted his doTERRA application after the February 28th meeting and after all those phone calls is just a coincidence?
Yes, my memory is that Gordon was committed even before I was.
Well, let's turn to that for a minute. By your testimony, you said that you had told him on February 9th of your impending move to doTERRA, correct?
Mr. Gaylord says objection, mischaracterizes testimony, and the court says overruled. And Harrison says, I told him of my intention to research and look at the company.
But you told him you were looking at moving to doTERRA, right?
That I was looking at the company, but there was no decision.
I understand there's no decision, but sir, just listen to my question. That you told him you were thinking about moving to doTERRA, correct?
No.
Your
Mr.
Honor.
Smith says,
Oh, sorry,
Your
listen.
Honor, 61's been displayed. It's not in evidence yet. I think counsel misspoke to the jury that I had shown that to the witness. And the court says, I have 61 as received. Mr. Smith says, it was received? Mr. Gaylord says, yeah. Mr. Smith says, then I did show it. Then I did show it. Mr. Gaylord says, no, you may not have shown it. Mr. Smith says, I didn't show it. Somebody else did.
No problem. Sometimes you're wrong, sometimes you're right.
Mr. Smith says, time warp for me, Your Honor.
No big deal. So, Mr. Harrison, my question back to you is let me see if I can kind of refocus this and get my question back on track here. When you spoke with Mr. Herbert on February 9th, you told him that you were researching this new company, doTERRA, and considered going there. Is that fair?
I told him that I was leaving Young Living.
Yes.
And that I would, as part of that, I would definitely investigate the new company.
And the new company was called doTERRA, correct?
Yes.
And he told you he thought that was a poor choice. Those were your words, right?
He was concerned for my leaving, yes.
And he told you he thought that was a poor choice. That was your testimony on Friday, right?
I don't think that's a good characterization. He was worried about me leaving.
You don't remember using the words, quote, poor choice, end quote, that Mr. Herbert told you it was a poor choice in that phone call.
I don't.
You don't remember saying that?
I don't.
Okay, then so today, did he think it was a bad idea?
He was concerned.
Okay, but ultimately, in the course of those phone calls, he decided that wherever you're going to go, I'm going to go, right?
He conveyed to me that if there was a new oil company, he was going. That was regardless of what I decided to do.
So I thought your testimony was, what he said to you was, wherever you're going, I'm going. Is that not what he said?
No, I recall him saying he would go to the new oil company. It wasn't based on whether I went or not.
Had nothing to do with you at all?
No.
That's your testimony?
Yes.
Okay, and you don't remember saying that what he said was, wherever you're going to go, I'll go. I'll follow you.
No.
Okay, let's change subjects again back to this February 28th meeting. Now, Mr. Harrison, you deny talking to Mr. James and Gina Truman about Operation Smooth Move on February 7th.
Correct. Yeah, I don't recall any reference to Smooth Move.
And you were in here for the opening statements made by counsel, correct?
Yes.
And you recall that in the opening statements, we talked about Operation Smooth Move involving big fish from Young Living, such as the Oldroyds and the Trumans. Do you recall that?
I recall that being said.
Now, you've described this meeting at Gina Truman's house as being just a small meeting that Gina put together, right?
I recall that being said. Oh, no, correct.
And in your testimony, that's not significant, not a particularly important meeting, right?
It was a small meeting she put together.
Isn't it true that this meeting was a lot more than that?
What do you mean?
Isn't it true that this meeting was the first step in carrying out Operation Smooth Move?
No. Mr. Gaylord says objection, lacks foundation, and the court says overruled and back to Mr. Toth.
Wouldn't you agree with me that this meeting was a big deal for doTERRA's recruiting new distributors?
Mr. Gaylord says objection, foundation. Justin Harrison says no, and the court says overruled. They were all talking at the same time, I'm sure. Back to Mr. Toth.
You disagree with that?
That it was a big deal?
Yes.
Yes, I would disagree that it was a big deal.
And you would would you agree with me, certainly, that the founders of doTERRA thought this was an important meeting, didn't they?
Mr. Smith says objection, lack of foundation, calls for speculation, and the court says sustained.
Did David Sterling ever tell you that this was an important meeting?
No, not that I recall, no.
Did Emily Wright ever tell you that this was an important meeting?
Not that I recall.
They didn't tell you that this was the first step in Operation Smooth Move?
No. Mr. Gaylord says objection, hearsay. And Mr. Smith says objection, lack of foundation, and the court says sustained. Back to Mr. Toth.
You talked to Mr. Sterling about what you were going to say at this meeting, didn't you, on February 28th?
I don't recall.
In fact, you talked to him several times about it, didn't you?
About the meeting? I don't recall.
Yes, no recollection whatsoever?
About the St. George meeting?
Yes.
No.
Isn't it true, sir, that you talked to David Sterling on February 28th about what you were going to be saying at this meeting?
I don't recall.
Let's take a look at your phone records. Let's turn to page 118.
Okay.
And look at lines 89 and 92. All represent to you, sir, that Mr. Sterling will testify that redacted phone number is his cell phone number. Do you have any reason to disagree with that?
I don't.
Do you recognize that as his cell phone number?
If that's his testimony,
So your phone records from February 28th at 1 o'clock in the afternoon show that you called Mr. Sterling and had a 5-minute conversation. See that?
I do.
And then you had another 4-minute conversation with him on February 28th at 1:40 p.m. Do you recall that?
I see it in the log.
And do you remember what you talked to him about?
I do not.
You don't think it was the meeting, the big meeting on February 28th?
Mr. Smith says objection, irrelevant, 401 and 403, and the court says sustained. And Justin finishes, I don't recall.
Let's turn the page of your phone records, please. Let's look at page 119. Let's look at lines 103 and 106.
Mr. Smith says, Your Honor, may we approach? And the court says yes. A sidebar discussion was had. Back to Mr. Toth.
So back on the record, Mr. Harrison. So we're back on February 28th and we're looking at your phone records. This is the evening that you conducted this meeting in Gina Truman's house, correct?
Correct.
And you have actually 2 more phone calls with Mr. Sterling, one at line 103 and one at line 106. Do you see that?
I do.
In fact, the final phone call you had before you conduct that meeting that evening is with Mr. Sterling for 2 minutes, correct? It's an incoming call to you?
Incoming call for 2 minutes, yes.
And you don't recall what you were talking to Mr. Sterling about, correct?
I do not.
Would you agree that the success of this meeting on February 28th was important to get this new oils company off the ground?
I would agree. It was important to Gina.
What about the company itself that you were conducting the meeting for?
No.
You don't think it was important at all?
Important, sure.
Well...
But not critically important, no.
Did any of the founders express to you before you conducted this meeting the importance of this meeting?
Mr. Gaylord says objection. Mr. Smith says objection, hearsay, and the court says overruled. Mr. Harrison says, not that I recall, no.
But they all called you the very next morning to find out how it went, didn't they?
Mr. Smith is not happy. He says, objection, lack of foundation. The court says overruled. Mr. Smith also says, and hearsay, Your Honor, depends on who. The court says, we'll see where that goes. I'll give you some latitude. Go ahead. Back to Mr. Toth.
They all called you the following morning to find out how the meeting went, didn't they, sir?
Mr. Smith says, objection, hearsay, lack of foundation. The court says overruled. And Harrison says, I would have to read through here and see who called and who didn't.
Let's turn our attention to that. Let's look on line 108 on page 119. The first phone call you received, and it's an incoming call at 8:50 a.m. Phone number redacted. I'll represent to you, sir, that it is a phone number that belongs to Greg Cook. Do you have any reason to disagree with that?
No.
And you had a 13-minute call with him. Do you see that?
I do.
Who is Mr. Greg Cook?
He is one of the owners of doTERRA.
One of the founders?
Yes.
Do you remember what you talked to him about that morning?
I do not.
Okay, let's look at the very next call, 9:45 a.m. That's a phone call from Emily Wright, isn't it?
I don't recall her number in my memory, sorry.
I'll represent to you that, and we've already had testimony. Redacted number is her phone number. Do you have any reason to disagree with that?
No.
You had a 14-minute call with her. Do you remember that?
Do I remember the call? No.
You have no recollection of the call at all?
No.
Does looking at your phone record here refresh your recollection?
No.
And then you made a phone call not long after finishing your phone call with Emily Wright, and you called redacted number. Do you see that?
I do.
And that is Lillian Shepard, also a defendant in this case, correct?
Yes.
And then later that morning, you call on line 112. You called David Hill, correct?
Correct.
Dr. Hill. And you had a 13-minute phone call with him, correct?
Correct.
And then, ultimately, you have 2 more phone calls with Emily Wright later that afternoon, correct?
Bro was busy.
Yeah.
He was on the phone all day. That's what it's showing. Yes.
So the morning after this February 28th meeting, you spoke with Greg Cook, Emily Wright, David Hill, and Lillian Shepard, correct?
Correct.
And your recollection is you can't remember what you were talking to them about. Any of them?
True.
And looking at your phone records here does not refresh your recollection, correct?
No. Sorry. Correct. It does not refresh my recollection.
So, with the exception of Mr. Sterling, you'll agree with me that all of the founders of doTERRA called you that morning.
Mr. Smith says objection, lack of foundation, misstates the evidence, but the court says overruled. And Harrison says, I had conversations with 3 of them. Yes.
And Mr. Sterling, I don't see any record that Mr. Sterling called you that morning, did he? He didn't call you, did he?
Not that I'm aware of.
But we already know that Mr. Sterling had received an email from Rob James at 11 p.m. on the night of February 28th, telling them that you gave a fantastic presentation, didn't he?
Mr. Smith says objection, lack of foundation. Mr. Gaylord says join. The court says overruled. The witness says, I did see that email. Yes.
So, Mr. Sterling, he already knew how the meeting went on the 28th, didn't he?
Mr. Smith says objection, lack of foundation. The court says overruled. Mr. Harrison says, I can't speak for him.
So, let me ask you again, sir. Isn't it true that February 28th meeting was an important meeting to the launch of this new company?
Mr. Smith again says objection, asked and answered. The court says sustained.
Let's change topics. Let me ask you a little bit on a couple of other questions that came up. Based on your long experience in network marketing, you'd agree with me that good distributors are important to a network marketing company, wouldn't you?
Yes.
And you'd agree that losing a good distributor can hurt a network marketing company, can't it?
Yes.
That's why network marketing companies enter into non-solicitation agreements with their employees, isn't it?
Mr. Gaylord says objection. Mr. Smith says objection. Lack of foundation calls for a legal conclusion. Mr. Gaylord says speculation. Mr. Smith says incomplete hypothetical.
This is an area they opened up asking Kim about what the impact of losing distributors was and what Young Living's policies and procedures are, as well as his own non-solicitation agreement.
The court says, I'll allow it. And Justin Harrison says, okay, sorry, the question again?
That means I have to try to remember my question. In all seriousness, I'm going to have you look at what I have. You'd agree that's why a network marketing company has its employees sign non-solicitation agreements, right?
Yes.
And you'd agree that losing a good distributor can cause an injury that can actually hurt the company for a long time.
Mr. Smith, again. Objection. Incomplete hypothetical calls for speculation. The court says sustained. Mr. Smith says calls for expert opinion.
Oh my god.
Expert opinion.
Yep. So
in a court,
that's so funny.
They can talk about their own like experiences, but not necessarily what people say. That's why they object to hearsay. But like for impact on companies, that you have to pay an expert to come in to speak to that because so it's very complicated. I don't even understand. I'm probably misstating the law right now, but that's what I understand. They have to bring in experts for everything.
I just wonder what the expert, well, I mean, they could just be saying like expert opinions needed, or if there was an MLM expert there.
Oh yeah, there might be an MLM expert. I bet that they would have like an accountant but also when they bring an expert in, they have to interview the expert too, and both sides have to agree like we accept this person as an expert. So it's pretty, I don't know, and you get paid a ton of money to be an expert witness too.
Oh, I wonder if there's
So-
ever like nutrition expert witnesses.
Yeah, I think there can be. I'd look into it. You can get paid good money for it, especially if you're trusted, like an actual good expert witness. Okay, let me go back. Live chat, how you doing? Replay crew, much love to
Hi,
you.
Tanya.
Sorry I'm lagging. Tanya, hello.
Going from 1 to 2 kids is hard. I can't imagine.
Oh my goodness. And oddly enough, all to people involved with either Young Living or doTERRA.
Mhm. We're almost done with this one.
Sweet. All right, let's go.
Okay.
Which line are we on? Expert,
Sustained.
right?
Yeah, so 13.
Okay.
Let me ask you. You've been involved in the network marketing business most of your adult life, correct?
Correct.
Over time, you've seen network marketing companies lose good distributors, correct?
I have.
And you've seen the impact of losing a good distributor on a network marketing company, have you not?
I have.
Okay, and would you agree with me then that the harm to a network marketing company of losing a good distributor is something that can last for a long time?
Mr. Gaylord says objection. Mr. Smith says objection. Incomplete hypothetical. Calls for legal conclusion. Calls for expert opinion. The court says sustained.
Mr. Harrison, that's all I have for you. Thank you.
Mr. Harrison says thank you. And the court says, Mr. Gaylord, any further cross? Mr. Gaylord says, I do. I'm looking at the hour. Wasn't sure if lunch had arrived. The court says it's here. Thank you for keeping track of that point. We'll take a brief recess. And then if you've got lunch here, blah, 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 blah. So they're wrapping up now.
Okay, cool. Let me just turn my Mr.
Demon lawyer voice off. Holy crap. That was a good section. And guess
It
what?
was.
We're on page 1012. Heck yeah.
Yes.
We're moving
Mhm.
along.
The next
Only
is a
3,000.
recross. It's pretty short.
You want to do the whole you want to do the
No, I can't. I hear my
yeah,
little one.
I know, because I was like I gotta go too. So
Yeah.
Okay. Live chat.
But for Saturday, it'll be good.
Yes. And then we'll get through this transcript by Saturday, and then we'll be able to move to the next one. So I'll try to get the snark notes out for Sunday. How many pages are left?
Well,
3,000 pages. How many pages in this one?
There's still more.
There's like 170 pages left in
Yeah,
this.
there's still.
And this, but we're not probably going to read the sidebar discussions.
No.
So yeah, live chat, you've been incredible. Replay crew, much non-culty love to you as well. If you haven't liked the stream, we would love for you to like the stream. If you want to keep hearing this content, we'd love for you to subscribe. If you discover our channels, we're co-streaming to Kat's channel. Kat's co-streaming on my channel, and yes, we are going to be here for a while. We're in this for the long haul. I hope that we will get through it. We will get through it.
Oh yeah. We've already done a quarter.
You're welcome, Fizzle Sticks.
Thank you for thinking
Happy to do this, and we're having fun with y'all. It's fun to do it with the live chat. Avery, I may see if you can help on Saturday with the comments, if or someone can help with the comments and come in the back end to put them on the stream, because we have some great comments coming in from Kat's channel. So love to everyone to be able to see them on both sides. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and play the outro, and we will catch you on the next live stream. Where is it? Okay, goodbye.